This lecture is called The Three-Body Gurdjieff Enneagram of Body, Spirit, and Soul. In All and Everything, second series, Meetings with Remarkable Men, and I should add woman. Chapter 10, Gurdjieff writes, The question of Professor Skridlov was torn from him as from the depths of his being, when Father Giovanni had said that, before counting on really coming under the effects and influences of the higher forces, it was absolutely necessary to have a soul, which was possible to acquire only through voluntary and involuntary experiencings, and information intentionally learned about real events which had taken place in the past. He convincingly added that this in turn was possible almost exclusively in youth, when the definite data received from great nature are not yet spent on unnecessary, fantastic aims which appeal to be good, owing only to the abnormally established conditions of the people. At these words, Professor Skridlov sighed deeply and exclaimed in despair, "What then can we do? How can we live on?" In answer to this exclamation of Professor Skridlov, Father Giovanni, having remained silent for a moment, expressed these remarkable thoughts that I consider it necessary to reproduce in so far as possible word for word. I shall place them as relating to the question of the soul, that is the third independently formed part of the common presence of a man, in the chapter entitled The Divine Body of Man, and its needs and possible manifestations according to law, but only in the third series of my writings, as complementary to two chapters of the same series, which I have already decided and promised to devote, one to the words of the venerable Persian dervish concerning the body, that is the first independently formed part in the common presence of a man, and the other to the elucidations of the old fakir, concerning the second independently formed part of a man, namely his spirit. Unfortunately, Gurdjieff never did include these three talks in his three series, as he promised, since he never completed the third series. This leaves us with having to rely on the first series, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, The Holy Planet Purgatory, Chapter 39, to answer these questions. In this lengthy and inscrutable chapter, which covers the law of three and the law of seven, all of creation, and the holy planet Purgatory, can be found one of the most important sections, the seven stoppenders, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, of the physical body, and the corresponding organs known as the food octave. However, before getting too excited, Gurdjieff merely hints at the spirit, Christian body, entering in as air, and shows nothing about the soul. Thus Gurdjieff fails to reveal the promised divine body of man and its needs and possible manifestations according to law, and leaves us to have to search for the answers. Fortunately, prior to his writings of Beelzebub's Tales, Gurdjieff had given lectures to his early students on this subject, which were recorded by P.D. Ouspensky in his book In Search of the Miraculous, Chapter 9, where he covered the food octave. Here the stoppenders are called hydrogens, vibrational bits of matter where large numbers are more dense and small numbers are more ethereal. However, although Gurdjieff only names the stomach, the lungs, and the sex center in Search of the Miraculous, he does show the advancement of these hydrogens for the spirit and the start of the soul. They are allocated in the body, chest, which represents the spirit, the head, which represents the soul. And here is the diagram of the body, spirit, soul factory. One would have expected Gurdjieff's Holy Planet Purgatory to contain more detail than In Search of the Miraculous, and to actually replace it, but it falls short. because it contains multiple mistakes. As shown in my lecture, the key to the soul is within the missing stoppender in the food octave, which were resolved using In Search of the Miraculous. These corrections will be incorporated here. The merging of both books will now be used to assign the physical organs in the three-body Enneagram that describes body, spirit, and soul. The connection of the hydrogens and the stoppenders to actual organs will certainly advance our understanding of the soul. And the final objective of this essay of building a three-body Enneagram with all the organs is shown here. In constructing the three-body Enneagram, I have added all the organs that correspond to the stoppenders of the body and the lungs from the holy planet Purgatory, and worked out the others from the diagram of In Search of the Miraculous. Note that I have added the endocrine system at law of the physical body, which is from the key to the soul is within the missing stoppender of the food octave. Both books demonstrate an important observation, that the entry points of the spirit octave, air, and that of the soul, impressions, in the food octave. Thus the starting do notes of the spirit and soul octaves enter into the food octave between mi and fa, and sol and la respectively. Thus, although the completed do of the body octave, shown in white, is at the top of the inner triangle, the completed do of the spirit at the lower right point of the inner triangle, shown in white, and the completed do of the soul at the lower left of the inner triangle, shown in white. It is this configuration that allows the completed do of the body and the completed do of the spirit to activate the soul. The completed do of the soul will activate the triune God. And actually this is opposite to what one might have assumed for the sake of symmetry, with all the completed do's of the body, spirit, and soul at the top. And here is the diagram that one might have expected. And this is really significant, because it shows that there are two activation points represented by the inner triangle. Although the two changes of frequency occur between mi and fa and ti and do, as shown in the first figure, they are meant to be distributed symmetrically as the second figure. It is here that Gurdjieff causes confusion in Holy Planet Purgatory by labeling the discontinuity between mi and fa as the mechano-coinciding midline, and the discontinuity between ti and do as the intentionally actualized midline, with the discontinuity between soul and la labeled as hanal ut. To avoid this confusion, I have relabeled the discontinuity between soul and la, which flowed from the symmetric distribution, to be the intentionally actualized midline, IA, and discarded hanal ut. This does not alter the directions of Beelzebub that being par duty is to be implied between soul and la, but rather emphasizes the position as intentionally actualized, IA. This position is often referred to as the second conscious shock. However, it is really the first and only conscious shock, with the position between mi and fa being the automatically actualized, AA. And here this is shown in this diagram, which gives more of an idea of what should happen here. The mechano-coinciding midline is at the right-hand point of the triangle, and the intentionally actualized midline is at the left-hand point of the triangle. And I've abbreviated the mechano-coinciding midline as AA and intentionally actualized midline as IA. But I will get into more detail about the third discontinuity at the top, at do. And I have labeled do as the incepting-converging alpha omega, AO. And this is the third discontinuity between ti and the higher do. Clearly the completed do, the completion of the octave do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti to higher do, has a greater function than merely completion of the discontinuity between ti and the higher do. This higher do being now on the level of the next higher octave is like a converging point in mathematics. Consequently, the discontinuity between T and the higher Do should be considered to be part of the higher Do. Thus I have given its name, as shown, to be the incepting-converging, and to this I added the Christian symbol from the Book of Revelation, Alpha, Omega, with its connotation of the first shall be last and the last shall be first. This is also similar to the aurora boreal, the snake that bites its tail. Both Holy Planet Purgatory and In Search of the Miraculous verify this concept. In the creation of the universe by his endlessness in Holy Planet Purgatory 754, and I quote here, and namely with the purpose of providing the requisite inherency for receiving for its functioning the automatic affluence of all forces which were near, he, capital He, lengthened the stopender between the third and fourth deflections, that's mi fa. This same stopender of the sacred Parapashnak is just that one that is still called the mechano-coinciding midline. And the stopender which he shortened is between the last deflection and the beginning of the new cycle of its completing process, by the same shortening, for the purpose of facilitating the commencement of a new cycle of its completing process. He predetermined the functioning of the given stopender to be dependent only on the affluence of forces obtained from the outside, which I have changed to inside, through that stopender, from the results of the action of that cosmic concentration itself, in which the completing process of this primordial fundamental sacred law flows. I changed outside to inside because it seems to violate the whole point of the results within the octave being manifested in the completed Do. It may have been confused in the sense that in the creation of the universe, the shortening allowed the endlessness to project his theomertma logos of the word God down through the octaves of the creation, thus from the outside as seen from below. The discontinuity of the creation T-Do is overcome by divine will in Beelzebub's Tales, Holy Planet Purgatory, page 756. For the clarity of certain of my future explanations, it must be remarked that in the process of the creation of the now existing world, the divine willpower of our endlessness participated only in the beginning. The subsequent creation went on automatically of its own accord, entirely without the participation of his own divine willpower, thanks to these two changed fundamental primordial cosmic laws. This diagram from In Search of the Miraculous, chapter 9, supports the concept of joining T-Do, C being the old term for T. And you see the ray of creation goes from the absolute to the moon, which leaves 3 intervals. It must be observed that although there are 6 intervals in these 3 octaves, only 3 of them actually require to be supplemented from outside. The first interval between Do and C is filled by the will of the Absolute. The second interval, Do-C, is filled by the influence of the sun's mass upon the radiations passing through it. And the third interval, Do-C, is filled by the action of the Earth's mass upon the radiations passing through it. But what is most important in this diagram is that the Do-C is included within one point. And here you can see that the Do-C is now one circle. In biology, there are many versions of the number of bodily systems, varying from 11 to 12. I have 13, by elevating the sensory system and the higher brain system. I also subtracted out 4 passive systems. Thus I have 9 active systems. And here are the 9 active systems of the human body in Gurdjieff's food octave order. The first one is Do, the digestive system. The second one is Re, the circulatory system. The third one is Mi, the lymphatic system. The fourth is the automatic activator, which is the lungs. The fifth is Fa, the nervous system, cerebellum. The sixth is Soul, the higher brain system, cerebrum. The 7th is the intentional activator, the sensory system, the 5 senses, the vestibular and proprioception. 7 is the intentional activator. The 8th is law, the endocrine system, which I added from the correction to Beelzebub's tales in the key to the soul is within the missing stoppander in the food octave. And the 9th is T, the reproductive system, the testes and ovaries. And then the 4 passive systems, which I have excluded, are the exocrine system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, and the renal system, the urinary system, bladder and kidneys, excretory system. So now in Holy Planet Purgatory, page 790, the active elements which compose the second being, food or air, and which enter into the presences of beings also for evolution through the second being, food, begin from the nose of the beings, gradually evolve with the cooperation of various processes of homeostasis of local character, and are also transmuted this time in the what are called lungs of beings, but into proteohairy called astral proteohairy. And then the substances of astral proteohairy, entering into the presence of beings for their own evolution, and having still in themselves, according to the sacred Heptaparapashnak, all the possibilities of evolving from their centers of gravity by the process of homeostasis alone, mixed with the total substances of the first being food, which have already evolved from the third stoppander of the Heptaparapashnak, and further evolved together, and thus help these substances of the first being food to pass through the lower mechano-coinciding middling, and to be transmuted into definite substances, into being tetratohairy, and the astral proteohairy itself is transmuted into the substances named astral defectory. And as to the third body of the soul, we must rely on Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous, chapter 7, where the dough of the soul has the same hydrogen number of 48 as the me of the spirit and soul of the body, which places it between soul and la, in the same way that the dough of spirit was placed between me and fa of the body. The placement of the triangle points is implied by the lungs being after me, being triteohairy liver in Beelzebub's tales, Holy Planet Purgatory. This led to figure 59 in the chapter of Ouspensky, which I improved upon by continuing them from the law of spirit and me of soul. So next we can use the hydrogen diagram in Search of the Miraculous, and I will proceed to expand the food octave into a 3-body Enneagram to add spirit and soul octaves. So here is the body, spirit, soul factory, head, chest, and lower body, from In Search of the Miraculous, chapter 9, figure 39. The lower body is the physical octave, and it goes from do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And you'll see in this that the T, of course, is the sexual system, and that's gone down to the lower body. And then the chest, which is the emotions, goes from do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and stops at la. And then the head, which is the soul octave, goes from do, re, mi, and stops there. It looked like one could rely on the Ouspensky diagram for the locations of the organs of the food octaves, since it showed their locations as lower body, chest, and head. In that previous lecture about the missing stoppander, I swapped cerebellum and cerebrum because the cerebrum is higher, and this was supported in an Ouspensky diagram, with the cerebellum fa in the middle story of the chest, as the spinal cerebellum and cerebrum in the top story of the head. Also note the position la, the missing stoppander, is included in the chest, which makes sense, as the gravity center feels to be in the chest, although science claims that the hypothalamus in the brain controls all. It is of interest that the spirit octave dips down to the body at soul, and the soul octave to the spirit at re, and body at mi. If one looks at the dotted lines, you see do octave of the emotions influencing me of the food octave. This is, of course, the air from the lung. The beginning of the soul octave influencing me of the spirit octave. There's just one point that I take issue with the Ouspensky's diagram, and this is a line going from impressions Do 48 of the soul octave to me 48 of the spirit octave. I believe that the line from Do 48 to soul 48 better emphasizes the need for being Padog Judy at the intentional activation point, a position of the cerebrum and the endocrine system. Although it is true that the spirit octave at the point between me and Fa requires activation, I would suggest that this is agape love, as I discussed in The Key to the Soul is Within the Missing Sapender, where in Gurdjieff's Holy Planet Purgatory, I swapped Gurdjieff's cerebellum and cerebrum. In chapter 17 of In Search of the Miraculous, Gurdjieff gave a diagram of the four bodies of man, figure 57, which then led to the diagram of everything living, figure 58. And here is the diagram. You'll see how this does relate to food, which is an interesting concept. You have archangels, angels, man, vertebrates, invertebrates, plants, minerals, and metals. It uses hydrogen numbers, but Gurdjieff admitted that they were not immediately relatable in this diagram to previous diagrams in Ouspensky. It shows a circle to the left, which was the average of man, angels, and archangels. Then on the top right was a circle that represented what was the food. Bottom right was its food. It seems strange that angels should take vertebrates as food, as it felt logical that angels are in the realm of spirit, Kesjan body. They should feed on man's spirit formed from air. Likewise, if archangels are in the realm of soul, they would feed on man's soul formed from the mind. Once I adjusted this, I changed man's food to animals instead of invertebrates, locusts. Perhaps vegetarians made this change. This made the food for and the food to be just one away instead of two, giving this diagram. In trying to relate the hydrogen numbers, I also looked at the four bodies of man in the preceding diagram, 57. Considering that Gurdjieff and Beelzebub's tales appeared to have reverted to three bodies instead of four, I just took the values of the three right columns and matched the everything living diagram. The interesting result was that suddenly I needed the eternal, unchanging box to contain a higher body, which I then associated with what I am calling the Anklet body, based on the absolute reason of his endlessness himself. In Beelzebub's tales, the chapter, The Inevitable Result of Impartial Mentation, chapter 47, page 1177. Then suddenly 12 and 6 of these bodies had a purpose as Anklet body's food, being the soul, the Anklet body being the food for the eternal, unchanging. I associated the bottom box to the so-called dark matter made up of photons. So my changes here is that H6 is the Anklet body, H12 is archangels, H24 is angels, H48 is the physical body, etc. When I aligned these with the Ouspensky hydrogen diagrams in chapter 9, my adjustments gave a perfect match, without Gurdjieff's reduction columns, with plants now on the organic shock. Unfortunately, even though the diagram of everything living and the table of hydrogens now match, you will note that the hydrogens being already at me with H12 in the soul octave run out when displayed in the body-spirit octave. So here you've got a 6, a 3, and a repeated 1. But here is my completed body-spirit-soul factory using the Ouspensky diagram. And for the body, the missing stopender of the food octave was added by me and assigned to the endocrine system using law 24 of the body octave. Now for the spirit octave, I looked at traditional Chinese medicine as a guide. In the Su Wen, the Book of Plain Questions, a dialogue between the Yellow Emperor and his medical advisors, It says that there are 5 yin organs that produce 5 kinds of qi. Joy is from the heart, anger is from the liver, pensiveness is from the spleen, anxiety is from the lungs, and fear is from the kidneys, adrenal gland. It is for this reason that I assigned 4 organs for the spirit octave, which relates to emotion, leaving out the liver, which was already part of the Gurdjieff body position, me. The lungs are clearly the do of the spirit octave, and the heart, the 4th chakra, called the heart chakra, would be the re of the spirit octave. The thymus at position me of the spirit octave is basically viewed by medical science as a discarded organ, useful in youth and atrophied in old age. Sounds like a metaphor. However, like the derivation of the name of the Greek word thymus, it is a source of courage and passion. Plato has it as the center of one's being, mediating between the reason of the brain and carnal desires. It is an active player in the early immune system and is the location of the gorilla-like thump on the chest. One can view it as a catcher's mitt of the heart. This would be the 5th chakra, as the throat chakra. Next, referring to the dialogue of the yellow emperor organs, we have the spleen and the kidneys that relate to the spirit octave. When we observe that Ouspensky's hydrogen diagram of the spirit, the line goes down to the body at position Fa and Soul. These align perfectly as the spleen at Fa and kidneys at Soul. For the last position, T, I have assigned the famous pineal or pineal gland, shaped like a pine cone, shown in the pinecone statue at the Vatican, and is often called the door of consciousness. It is also referred to as the 3rd eye, as the 6th chakra, called the seat of the soul, although clearly the seat of the spirit is more correct. Thus it is better as the 7th chakra, known as the crown chakra. Many agree with this. Its action is like the Vesca Pisces, which is created by 2 spheres with the same radius, which intersect each other's circumference. For the second to last position, La is the hypothalamus, which is similar importance to the pineal gland. Its main role is to keep the body in homeostasis as much as possible, thus maintaining a healthful, balanced body state. The hypothalamus acts as the connection between the endocrine and the nervous systems to achieve this. It plays its part in many essential functions of the body, such as body temperature, thirst, appetite and weight control, emotions, sleep cycles, sex drive, childbirth, blood pressure and heart rate, production of digestive juices, balancing body fluids. As different systems and parts of the body send signals to the brain, they alert the hypothalamus to any unbalanced factors that need addressing, and it responds by releasing the right hormones into the bloodstream to balance the body. Most importantly, it maintains an internal temperature of 98.6 Fahrenheit. Thus, if it is too high, it tells the body to sweat. If it is too cold, then it creates internal heat by shivering. It fits better as the 6th chakra, the 3rd eye chakra. The pituitary gland, which is often attributed to the throat chakra, is attached to the hypothalamus, but the pituitary gland relates more to the endocrine system. So in this diagram, I highlighted these centers in yellow. As to the soul octave, it is clear that all of these vibration locations must be in the brain. I decided to use the 5 senses, touch, taste, smell, hearing, and seeing, as the note do of the soul octave. And here I did an Enneagram of 5 senses, and added 2 other senses, the vestibular system and the proprioception system are also acknowledged to be real senses by Wikipedia as follows. The vestibular system adjusts balance and attention. This system accounts for the perception of our body in relation to gravity, movement, and balance. It provides information related to movement and head position. It is important for the development of balance, coordination, eye control, attention, being secure with movement, and some aspects of language and development. It measures acceleration, G-force, body movements, and head positions, knowing that you are moving when you are in an elevator, knowing whether you are lying down or sitting up, and being able to walk along a balance beam. This sixth sense is what I have assigned to the soul octave at Re. And if you look at the corresponding Re in the initial Ouspensky diagram, you'll see that it's located in the chest. And this is probably due to the concept that balance is at the center of the chest in one's being. It supports my choice of separating this sixth sense to be actually a stoppender, which I have assigned at Re. The proprioception system maintains the ability of spatial prediction, intuition, and awareness of self. It is a sensing of the relative position of neighboring parts of the body and strength of effort being employed in movement. It was developed by the nervous system as a means to keep track of and control of the different parts of the body. A normal person can move a finger knowing where and what the finger is doing. With little effort, the normal person can just put his or her finger to his or her nose easily. Without it, the brain cannot feel what the finger is doing, and the process must be carried out in more conscious and calculated steps, using vision to compensate for the lost feedback on the movement of the finger. Thus, it is used in sobriety tests by the police, and I have assigned this to me of the soul octave. And interestingly, the corresponding me in the initial Ouspensky diagram was located in the lower body level, which was probably due to the concept that the awareness of self comes from the ground up. It supports my choice of separating it as an actual stoppender. In terms of these two senses, the sixth and the seventh sense, it is interesting to observe the often parroted necessity of attention, impartiality, and awareness of self in the Gurdjieff work, and to see its similarity to these senses. Perhaps our bodily senses have been in the work all along. Just the act of taking off our glasses and getting out of bed after reading some New Age book, or this essay by a Gurdjieffian idiot like me, has used both of these senses. In the humor of Gurdjieff, I call it the VP method of becoming a man, woman in capitals. Wink. Given the importance of these two senses in the Gurdjieff system, I have made them part of the soul octave. These senses are part of the body, but the vibration centers of the soul from Fa to Ti are not. These last vibrations are assigned to the four lobes of the brain, but they are just vague concepts that transcend the measured functions of the brain. They must exist beyond death of the brain to complete the soul. The parietal lobe processes integrate sensual information about temperature, taste, touch, recognizes faces, and reads words. The occipital lobe is primarily responsible for vision, turning what the eyes see into meaningful information. The temporal lobe is responsible for memory, speech, learning, and sense of smell. The right temporal lobe manages recognition of faces and other visual objects. The left temporal helps with the remembering and understanding language, which is part of verbal memory. The frontal lobe is important for cognitive functions and control of voluntary movement or activity. In associating mental organs with the mind and therefore the soul, many experts think there are three ways we store memories. First in the sensory stage, then in short-term memory, and ultimately for some memories in long-term memory. People tend to more easily store material on subjects that they already know something about, since the information has more meaning to them and can be mentally connected to related information that is already stored in their long-term memory. This is why someone who has the higher average memory may be able to remember a greater depth of information about one particular subject. This relates to Gurdjieff's form and sequence, where it's important to build your brain with important interests that are of value. Pareto-frontal integration theory. Richard Hauer and Rex Young compiled a list of all the brain areas previous neuroimaging studies had found to be related to intelligence, placing greater emphasis on those areas that appeared multiple times. The list they came up with suggests that most of the brain areas thought to play a role in intelligence are clustered in the frontal and parietal lobes. The hippocampus lays down memories of this rapid sense of satisfaction, and the amygdala creates a conditioned response to certain stimuli. Having associated the 3 octaves of body, spirit, and soul with an organ of the body, it is possible to create a 3-body Enneagram. Now that I have proposed these organs in the food octave to expand the spirit and the soul, let's look at every spiritual system that might give us information about the accuracy of my choices. So let's see if these choices can be verified by looking at Gurdjieff's cosmoses and other systems such as the Tarot, Buddha's Eightfold Path, Jesus' Lord's Prayer, 23rd Psalm, Genesis, Sumerian Creation, and science. And first of all, I'm going to take the tarot cards from the major arcana cards on the tarot of the Kabbalah. It's from my essay, Placing the Major Arcana Cards of the Tarot on the Kabbalah. The 22 cards of the major arcana, leaving out the 22nd, which is the Fool card 0, represent the 3 octaves of the possible human bodies, body, spirit, and soul. The reasoning that follows here from my insight about the major arcana cards is that Star 14, Moon 18, Sun 19, and cards 20 and 21 are not just meaningless symbols of unknown relationships, but actually supporting cards of the soul after the death of the physical body. Thus we have 7 cosmoses of the universe given by Gurdjieff in Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous, from bottom to top, dense to light, moon to holy sun absolute. And here you can see how the major arcana cards match up to the 7 cosmoses. Number 1, the Philosopher's Stone. Number 2 is the Earth, a dog howling at the moon. 3 is the Solar System, which I have used the Star card for. 4 is the Sun, and 5 is the Milky Way Galaxy, which I have used Atlas holding up the universe. And 6 is all galaxies, which I have made up this card with Sophia and Jesus. And then finally there's the Absolute. So here are all the major arcana cards on each one of the points in the 3-body octave. I am ascribing Buddha's Eightfold Path to mental activity and therefore to the soul, as defined by Gurdjieff. The order of these becomes important. They're often listed as right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. However, it is quite possible that passing down of the true words of Buddha are as hazy as the New Testament, therefore not necessarily correct. Thus I have reordered them to better match the physical organs associated with each as shown. So I have Do, right effort, to be the 5 senses, Re, right action, to be the vestibular system, Mi, right livelihood, to be the proprioception system, Fa, right intention, to be the parietal lobe, Soul, right view, to be the occipital lobe, La, right speech, to be the temporal lobe, Ti, right mindfulness, to be the frontal lobe, and Do, right contemplation, to be the completed body. Just as the Buddhist teaching is more related to mental characteristics reacting to knowledge, the teaching of Jesus is more related to emotional characteristics, and therefore of the spirit octave relating to music. The 23rd Psalm parallels this. So in this table, from lower to higher, associates the 3 octaves, body, spirit, and soul, with the physical organs of the body, the related philosophies, myths, and religions. Note that some also show the points of action within the octaves. So I've combined the Genesis and Sumerian creation together. Quantum creation will be explained later in the lecture Photonic Soul. So here at body Do position 0, which is the stomach, associating that with the tarot card Magician, and quantum creation Photon. Then we have Re, the duodenum, associated with the High Priestess, and the ultraviolet photon. For me, the liver, we have the Empress and the electron. And then here's the automatic activation point of the lungs, and I associate this with gravity. And then Fa, we have the cerebellum, which is the Emperor, and the proton. Soul is cerebrum, and there's the Hierophant, the neutron. Then there's the intentional activation point, being Padog Judy, which I have as the charge field, and La, the endocrine system, the levers, and the elements, and then T, the sexual system, the chariot, and the compounds, and Do, the completed body. And for Do of the spirit, I have the lungs, the lion, and here is the Lord's Prayer and 23rd Psalm. And for the music knowledge section, I have rhythm. And here's Re, which is the heart. I have the Hermit. And there's the Lord's Prayer at Thy Kingdom Come. And the Lord is my shepherd. And then I have that for melody. And Me is the thymus. And that matches the wheel of fortune. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He leadeth me beside the still waters. And this is like the timbre of music. And then we have the automatic activation point of agape love. Give us this day our daily bread. He restoreth my spirit. And Fa, we have the spleen. And here's the devil card. Forgive us our debts, and he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness. And this is like harmony. And then Soul is the kidneys, and adrenal gland, and that's the hanged man. We forgive our debtors. In the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And this is like dynamics. And then here's the internal activation point, insight, epiphany. And La is the hypothalamus, which is associated with the death card of the tarot. Lead us not into temptation. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And the pineal gland at T is like last judgment. Deliver us from evil. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And then we have Do, the completed spirit. Thine is the kingdom and the power and glory. Thou anointest my head with oil. So here we are at the soul. The Do of the soul is the 5 senses. And the Gurdjieff cosmos that corresponds to this is the microcosmos. And the angel card of the tarot is the first card of the soul, to take away Crowley's influence to a more appropriate point. The beginning of the soul would be the angel, obviously. And then here is quite interesting. This is the day 7 of creation, and all the story of the serpent and the Lord God. It was more than a place where God rested. It's the whole story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil that talks about knowing in the biblical sense. Male and female are like God, having procreation. And this I talk about in my lecture, The Soul is Sex, but Sex is not Soul, Kunda Buffer and the limbic system. And what's implied with the Gurdjieff octave at T, which is the sexual system. is that T going to Do is symbolic of the sexual energy building the soul. So in terms of Buddhist system, I associate this with right effort. And then Re is the vestibular system, which controls balance. And this is Gurdjieff's cosmos of Tetatocosmos, elements, neural networks, man, woman. And here's the Tower card of the major arcana. And this is associated with day 6 of Genesis, where God said, "Let us make man in our image." And in the Sumerian Creation, Marduk asks Enki to create humans to serve the gods. This is associated with right action of Buddha and similar to processed data. And then Me is the proprioception system, spatial orientation. And this is Gurdjieff's Tridocosmos, third order suns, planet Earth. And this is associated with the earth, a dog howling at the moon of the tarot. And this would be like day 5 of creation, where animals are created. And this is associated with the Buddhist card, right livelihood and structured data. And then we have AA, which is like the holy planet Purgatory, automatic activation. And the Fa is the parietal lobe. And this is Gurdjieff's mesocosmos, the middle cosmos. And associated with the solar system, moving stars. And then day 4 is where God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. And this is Buddha's right intention, equivalent to intuition. And the occipital lobe, which is vision and perception, is soul, which corresponds to Tefertocosmos, the second order sun. So I have the sun card of the major arcana. And this is in Genesis, where God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And this is equivalent to Buddha's right view and knowledge. And then the intentional activation point, active mentation. And then La is the temporal lobe. This is the Gurdjieff's macrocosmos, Atlas holding up the Milky Way. This is day 2 of Genesis. God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God created the firmament, and God called the firmament heaven. And this is in the Sumerian Creation, where Marduk leads the attack and kills Tiamat, and the demons are imprisoned. This is associated with the right speech of Buddha and understanding. Then we have the frontal lobe at T, which is equivalent to Gurdjieff's protocosmos, associated with the galaxies, the megalocosmos tarot card that I created. And in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And this is the salt water, Tiamat, in the Sumerian. And this is equivalent to right mindfulness and wisdom. And finally, the Do, the completed Do of the soul, the anclad body. This is day 8, praise the Creator, praise for Marduk. This is equivalent to Buddha's right concentration. So the 3-body Enneagram can be shown in a spreadsheet, which I call the 4-realm chart. And you see you have the body, the spirit, the soul, and then God consciousness. And you can see the Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti of the body. Do of the spirit enters in at the lungs. Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti. You see where the Do of the soul enters in and goes from Do to Ti. And then coming to the realm 7, you already have the Holy Sun Absolute as the passive force. You have the megalocosmos as neutral force, which would be automatic activation. And the completed soul, the anclad body, the Sun Sophia card of the major arcana. This would be the intentional activation, which is the Anklet body. So these are the three forces of the triune God. And here is another way of showing them where I condensed them. And what you could observe here is purple cards. These are cards that exist after death, and therefore they must be created in your lifetime. And here it's quite interesting if you create an inverted triangle within the Enneagram. It shows you in the black lines to segregate the different organs, the cerebellum from the cerebrum, to avoid automatic thinking, and the endocrine system from the sexual system, to prevent hormones from contaminating sexual energy, and the temporal lobe from the frontal lobe to form lasting consciousness. Returning to the three-body Enneagram shown previously, it must be remembered that the Enneagram shows the position of the 7 notes of the octave from Do to T, but it is built with 9 points. Thus there are 2 places where these notes are activated by 2 points of an inner triangle, which represents the action of the law of 3 inside of the law of 7. These 2 places I have labeled as plus active and neutral, and they are between me and Fa, and Soul and La. Note that the labeling of the Enneagram starts at 1, at Re, leaving 9 at the lower Do, higher Do, at the apex of the triangle, which I have labeled as passive. Shown are 3 engines of 3 passive, active, and neutral, each beginning at a discontinuity, with the 4th position being its completion of that octave, being of the quality of the next octave, assisting in that octave. Each of the 3 octaves begins at a different point. The body octave begins at 9 or 0 and goes to 3, which is at AA, which is the automatic activation, and then to 6, which is the intentional activation, and then to AO, which is the incepting-converging point at 9. The spirit octave begins at 3, which is AO, the Do, and goes to the automatic activation point at 6, and then to the intentional activation point IA, up at 9, and then to AO, 3, at its completion. The soul begins at Do, AO, at point 6, and then to its automatic activation point, which is up at 9, and then to its intentional activation point at 3, and then ends at its AO point, which is the higher Do. I'll cover this in more detail in the next lecture called Photonic Soul.